Hi, everybody. This is Warren Herman. Tonight we're going to talk about something very important, which has to do with the way that we can understand the married vocation in the time period after the Second Vatican Council. The Second Vatican Council proposed to us a very important idea, and this is the universal call to holiness. And so, what we have to come to understand is the specific ways that we can understand the integration of various principles and practices in this time period, and how this integration unlocks new avenues of pursuing the married vocation as a path to conscious holiness, to actively seek holiness in that state. And this is all based on the fact that relationships they not only are expressions of who we are, but they draw out those things that are hidden in us. And that includes the unconscious material that we normally keep buried, and which is not triggered by other types of context, such as simply sitting alone in a room. So the real question comes to mind then, which is, what happens when that material comes to the surface? What do we do with it? And is marriage a way of drawing that out? And especially, is marriage in this time period a way of drawing it out and processing it quickly, effectively, in a way that rapidly can create health and holiness if we know what we're doing? So we have to understand that when relationships draw out more unconscious material than simply not being in any relationship, it makes sense that we need a full repertoire of conscious skills to be able to deal with it. We have to ensure that we know how to use all of our mental faculties in order to deal with all these different passions, emotions, and attachments which will be triggered. We can't say this, we can't say this in opposition to the way in which the church proposes celibacy as a higher vocation than the married state. But there are very many other principles that we could draw upon here that can draw out some new implications. One humorous way I'd like to look at it is this child's toy. This is a kind of like a light sword that you get at the circus. I got this at the circus when I was a small child. What we can understand here is we can imagine this sword in this state here, this at this level, shrunken down, not fully opened. There's got these other things in it. We can understand this sword to represent the kind of repertoire of skills of traditional Catholicism. You can kind of do some good stuff with it, right? You can bop someone with it. It has the ability to have, and in the old days, when it had. It actually used to make a light, so you could turn it on. It's been not able to make a light for a long time. But in reality, you can think of Catholicism and grace like this light. You could shine the light, and then there's the different skills you could use to kind of do things, different coping techniques. And so traditional Catholicism specialized in certain coping techniques, which are based on the virtues and some practices that maybe you'd get from some kind of the Western philosophical tradition and some different things like that. But you had some basic skills, traditional skills in traditional spirituality, and you have the light of grace. That's what you originally had. That's what you really could use to cope with any situation, including the married state. But the thing that I'm saying here is that the married vocation has a unique intensity. It accelerates the unloading of the unconscious. It creates a kind of constant relational friction, which can go into two directions. It can cause deep purification and growth in holiness, or destructive patterns and breakdown. The difference is not in the vocation itself, but in the skills possessed by the people who are living it. And so what am I saying here? I'm really saying here that you have to have the skills to deal with that rapid unloading of the unconscious. And one of the reasons why celibacy has been proposed throughout the centuries as a superior vocation is because we haven't had a sufficient sword to beat down all those different things that are going to rapidly come out of the unconscious. We haven't had a way of defending against those dangers. Because there's something really powerful about the married state, and that's attachment. That's the mechanism that draws out the unconscious content, for better or worse. So marriage becomes a kind of place of rapid revelation of what's inside us, a kind of centrifugal sorting of the psyche. And, as we were saying, we had some techniques in traditional Catholicism. We had the light of grace. We had those things that are really important, the sacraments and all that. But overall, religious life has been conceived of as something that's more protected, it's much more exposed to do all these different challenges when you put yourself in the married state, because marriage operates in that messier, concrete level of life, and the religious life, kind of in a structured way, has us work through that unconscious material in a kind of a slow and steady wins the race kind of way. And in some ways it could be very intensive, but it's not as messy, it's not as haphazard. There's structure in addition to depth, so it kind of has another way of dealing with this. But one of the key developments that we have to understand in this time period, and this is something that I've spoken about in many different videos, is that in the post-Vatican II era, the purpose of the Church is to redeem all the principles and practices of other philosophies, religions, and therapies, and integrate them into its skill set. And so we could say that whereas the only thing we had to deal with marriage used to be this, now we have, I'm going to extend it, is this. We've got a whole lot of stuff. If we do the work that's necessary in the post-Vatican II era, we not only have our traditional skills, but we can, for example, redeem skills from various other levels of the personality and other types of traditions and therapies. And then we have a much more developed skill set. And as you can see here, I'm holding this giant sword. And so when we have the kind of weaponry to deal with the rapid unloading of the unconscious, then we have the ability to really understand how to deal with life and how we can have the married state be not something that's necessarily more dangerous, because the religious life had a certain structure to it. But now, if our coping skills have structure, we can go outside and take care of the unloading of the unconscious in that much more messy thing, which is family life. So you need to have this developed sword. And so in many videos, I've spoken about the redemption of various techniques, such as, if I'm just going to talk about therapies, for example, because this is coping skills, we could just talk mostly about therapies because they reflect the skills of the religions and philosophies. You could say it integrates the mindfulness skills, the imagination skills, the thought questioning skills from things like cognitive therapy and stoicism, behavioral practices, 12-step insights, and all kinds of other things. But when we integrate those things, we make this sword, where we bring in all the insights of all the other different things and rework them and reorder them and put them into the Catholic context. Then we have this new sword to be able to have a functional family life, because people are then equipped to go out and do that work. When their unconscious unloads, they have this sword to kind of work through the stuff, fight, and have that skill. And so we can really think, of course, these things are not replacements for faith, but they're tools elevated and ordered toward holiness. And what we want to understand here, very importantly, is that they aren't necessarily a means of grace. I mean, you have to have the light on, so to speak. You could have the sword out, the light off. You still have to have that deep connection to the roots of Catholic tradition and everything, but they're an expansion. See, this is an expansion of Catholic tradition into other areas and the use of other faculties such as awareness, imagination, the intellect, the will. It kind of expands those prayerful faculties that are the standard methods and kind of adds supplemental practices and principles that are reordered toward faith. And this is something that I've spoken about as kind of one of my main desires in life. You can see this all throughout the Catholic tradition. This is not just a weird thought. This is seen in St. Thomas Aquinas, and how he reworks Aristotle. This is seen in Our Lady of Guadalupe, how she kind of takes in the Aztec culture. This is everywhere in the Catholic tradition. So this is not a new idea, and I've spoken about it at length. It's this the making Christ the Lord of all that is authentically human. This is not really a controversial idea, but it shows now something very interesting, because it shows something that um, does something really interesting. It does two things, especially for me. It shows me the way in which my charism is a way of solving something that's been kind of interesting or central to what I think I might be about, which is kind of family life, like bringing about home. And so it shows how my methods, which is like all of my life's work, is meant to build this sword, to put all the different uh, philosophies, religions, and therapies into this expansion for traditional Catholicism so that we can wield this sword of all the coping skills that we could possibly have. So the thing that what we really want to do now is now it shows, why am I doing this? I'm doing this so that people can have this sword of coping skills so they can all live healthy family lives and make every family like the home in Nazareth. Because then everything is integrated into home. Everything is at home. All the coping skills are at home. All the philosophies and religions are at home. All the people are at home. And we can build homes by making everything be rehomed in Catholicism. This is a very powerful thing, a powerful way of understanding the charism, a way that I've never seen it before. And so I think it's very interesting to be able to think about this. Because in this light, we kind of see this this kind of outward flow, which gives us a coherent presentation of a kind of engaged Catholicism in the post-Vatican II era, showing a really in-depth understanding of what it means to have these redeemed coping skills and what their purpose is in the world, to make everything be at home, to make homes out of making all ideas have a home in Catholicism. That gives us a new way of thinking about this charism. And so in this light, it kind of reframes my charism, ordering it toward this kind of deep integration of the vocations. And it also shows that marriage now in the post-Vatican II era becomes not merely a dangerous thing, but a powerful path of rapid purification if we have the right tools. We could almost say that in marriage, everything is grist for the mill, but we have to have a very powerful mill, a new kind of mill, to work through all that grain that's coming through. And that's the thing. So we have to have this new weaponry in order to deal with marriage in a way that makes it not something that is as dangerous as it was in other time periods, and therefore might actually be aligned with the purposes of the church in this new age. And my personal purposes, the purposes of the church, so that it's not that we're really denying that celibacy and these things are the highest vocation. It's merely that other truths and other principles have now grown and developed in other ways, making it so that some people should be choosing this path as an active choice because that's what they're called to. And because these other things, these other doctrines, so to speak, have developed, it's not that we're denying the old thing. It's just there's now these other factors that are in play in our decision making because now we have these other things going on. So it's very interesting here because these integrated skills give us this heavier weapon, so to speak. They allow us to enter into intense relational environments without being overwhelmed. And instead of being destabilized by marriage, we can withstand it, navigate it, and grow through it. And in this light, marriage becomes not merely dangerous, as I said, but a powerful path of rapid purification. St. Pio talked about how marriage is the path of the crucifixion and religious life the path of the resurrection. And so now we can kind of be able to live out that daily crucifixion with the right skills. It can become transformative rather than destructive. And again, as I said, this doesn't overturn traditional teaching on the superiority of celibacy, but it does clarify how holiness in marriage can become more accessible and defensible in this post-Vatican II era when the person is equipped with integrated, redeemed skills at every level of the faculties so that they can work through all the passions and moderate and integrate them at a rate that we couldn't do in other time periods. So this, again, shows this could be a vocation to equip families with these redeemed natural techniques so they can handle unconscious dynamics, break defensive patterns, and grow toward becoming like the Holy Family, because then they can work through the kind of addictive, ego-based defense mechanisms, because then they can use their faculties instead. They can use their faculties so they no longer need to use their habits. They can kind of have these conscious mechanisms rather than unconscious ones to defend against their inner material. And so this can be very helpful. And so they can become like the Holy Family. So overall, what's the takeaway? When we understand this, we no longer see marriage as lesser in a simplistic way. Instead, we see different vocations as having different terrains and demands, and we see a coherent way of not of understanding marriage in a way that makes it so that I'm not triggering my sense of inferiority or badness about marriage. So marriage is intense because it reveals everything, but the revelation is not the problem. The real question is, do we have the skills to integrate and the right weapon to integrate and meet those demands? So the issue isn't whether marriage is harder or easier, it's whether we are equipped for the kind of purification that it brings.